This piano costs more than your entire life." Laughter erupted as Maya Lin, wrapped in her tattered coat, asked to play one piece in exchange for dinner. But Maya simply struck a single note pure as glass, freezing the hall. And as the melody poured forth, the very people who mocked her realized in shock the homeless woman was in fact a piano virtuoso. Maya stood there, her frayed backpack slung over one shoulder, her shoes scuffed and worn thin at the soles. The Grand Aurelia ballroom glittered around her chandeliers, dripping light tables draped in silk glasses clinking with overpriced wine. She didn't belong, or so they thought. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry, just a face that held quiet beauty, the kind you'd miss if you were looking for flash. Her coat, an old military surplus thing, hung loose on her frame, and her hands calloused but steady clutched the strap of her bag. The crowd, rich, polished, dripping in status, saw her, and assumed she'd wandered in off the street. They weren't entirely wrong. She had been walking for hours, stomach empty, drawn to the glow of the gala through the hotel's towering windows. But it wasn't desperation that brought her here. It was a promise, one she'd carried for years, though no one in that room could have guessed it. The laughter still echoed when she stepped forward, her voice hoarse but clear-cutting through the noise. "May I play one piece in exchange for a meal?" The words hung there, simple, unadorned. The room went quiet for a split second, like it was holding its breath before the mocking began. A woman in a sequined gown snorted, her lips curling. A man with a Rolex flicked his wrist, dismissing her without a word. The hotel manager, a wiry guy with a slicked-back ponytail, stepped forward, his face tight with irritation. "No outsiders allowed," he snapped, already motioning to security. Two guards in black suits moved toward her, their steps heavy on the polished floor. Maya didn't flinch. She just looked at the piano, a glossy black Fazioli, its curves catching the light like a living thing. "Just one piece," she said again, her voice steady like she was asking for something as simple as a glass of water. A cluster of guests near the bar exchanged glances. Their champagne flutes paused mid-sip, and one of them, a banker with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes sharp like knives, leaned into his companion, muttering just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Look at her, thinking she can waltz in here and touch that instrument. Probably hasn't washed her hands in days. The companion, a socialite with perfectly manicured nails and a necklace that screamed old money, let out a high-pitched giggle, covering her mouth with her hand, as if to hide her delight. But her eyes sparkled with malice as she added, "Darling, she'd probably play it like a drum, banging away without a clue." The banker nodded vigorously, his cheeks flushing with amusement, and soon others at adjacent tables joined in their whispers, turning into open chuckles that rippled outward, making the air feel thicker, more oppressive. Maya shifted her weight slightly, her fingers tightening on her backpack strap, but she kept her chin level, her gaze unwavering on the piano keys that gleamed under the lights, as if the growing chorus of derision was nothing more than background static. The socialite, encouraged by the response, raised her voice a notch. Someone should tell her this isn't a soup kitchen audition, and the banker slapped his knee lightly, his laughter barking out, drawing even more eyes toward Maya, who simply adjusted her coat collar with deliberate slowness, her movements a silent anchor in the swelling tide of ridicule. "Hey, if this story's hitting you, take a second to grab your phone, hit that like button, leave a comment about what's moving you, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep sharing stories like this, stories that remind us who we are." All right, let's keep going. Victor Grant, the real estate tycoon, leaned back in his chair, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass. He was 45, broad-shouldered, with a tan that screamed money and a suit that cost more than most people's rent. He loved moments like this, moments where he could flex his power, make someone small. "Drag her out," he said, whistling sharply like he was calling a dog. The crowd laughed again, louder this time, feeding off his energy. A woman in a red dress, her earrings sparkling, leaned toward her friend and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Does she even know which side of the piano to sit on?" The room roared. Another guest, a guy with slick hair and a fake smile, called out, "Play Twinkle Twinkle for us." The words landed like punches, each one meant to push Maya further down, to remind her she didn't belong. As the echoes of the latest jibe faded, a venture capitalist from the corner table, his glasses perched on the end of his nose and his tie loosened in mock casualness, stood up halfway, pointing a finger at Maya with exaggerated drama. "Hey everyone, let's give her a round of applause for even thinking she could entertain us, probably learned from busking on street corners." His words sparked a fresh wave of snickers, and the woman beside him, a marketing executive with highlighted hair and a predatory smile, chimed in by mimicking a clumsy piano-playing gesture, her fingers flailing wildly in the air. Like this, right? That's how they do it, where she's from. The venture capitalist doubled over, slightly clutching his stomach, as if the imitation was the funniest thing he'd seen all night. And the marketing executive blew a kiss toward Maya, her lips pursed in false sweetness, while others around them nodded approvingly, their faces alight with shared superiority. Maya paused her approach to the piano, turning her head just enough to meet the executive's gaze. For a fleeting second, her expression unchanging, but her eyes holding steady, causing the woman to falter mid-gesture, her hand dropping awkwardly to her side. The venture capitalist cleared his throat, trying to regain momentum, but the moment hung there a subtle crack in the facade. As Maya resumed her steps, her worn shoes making soft, unhurried sounds on the marble floor that somehow cut through the lingering titters, she didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the piano, her fingers brushing the edge of her coat. The manager stepped closer, his voice low and mean. "Scratch that piano and you'll owe us your life." The threat hung there, heavy, real. Victor, loving the spotlight, climbed onto a chair, his arms spread like he was hosting a circus. All right, he shouted, his voice booming over the chatter. "Let's make this fun. If she can play one piece, hell. If she can make one person cry, I'll buy her dinner. And throw in $1,000. The room erupted, turning a moment of charity into a cruel bet. People started shouting odds, tossing out numbers like they were at a racetrack. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, how long before she failed? Maya just stood there, her face calm, her hands steady. She didn't ask for permission again. She walked to the piano, her steps slow, deliberate, and sat down. Elena, the young waitress, froze mid-step, a tray of water glasses balanced in her hands. She was 22, a music student working nights to pay for school, her dark hair tied back in a messy bun. She'd been watching Maya from the corner of her eye, something about the woman's quiet presence pulling at her. When Maya sat at the piano, Elena's heart caught. She set a glass down, her hands trembling, and shot a pleading look at the manager. "Give her a chance," her eyes seemed to say. The manager didn't notice, too busy glaring at Maya, but a few older guests, the ones who'd been coming to these galas for years, shifted in their seats. Something about Maya's polite bow, the way she carried herself, made them uneasy. Victor, though, was all show. Free entertainment for everyone. He bellowed, waving his glass of whiskey. The crowd cheered, ready for a spectacle. Before Maya could touch the keys, a philanthropist from the head table her first stole, draped elegantly over her shoulders and her voice dripping with condescension, called out across the room. "Oh, please don't let her near it. She might infect the ivory with whatever grime she's carrying from the streets." The words sliced through the excitement, and her husband, a retired CEO with a booming laugh, pounded the table lightly, adding, "Exactly, dear. We'd have to fumigate the whole place afterward." The philanthropist tilted her head back in laughter, her stole slipping slightly as she did, and the CEO raised his glass in a mock toast, to the brave soul who thinks talent comes without pedigree. Their table erupted in applause for their own wit, and the ripple spread with guests at neighboring seats, mimicking the toast, their glasses clinking in unison, creating a symphony of exclusion that filled the ballroom. Maya, seated now, let her fingers hover just above the keys without touching them, her posture impeccable. And as the toast continued, she drew in a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling with measured calm, which only seemed to fuel the philanthropist's next quip, though her husband's hand on her arm paused her, his eyes flickering with a momentary doubt, as Maya's silence stretched, turning the clinks into an awkward fade. Maya's hands hovered over the keys, trembling just enough to make the room lean forward, expecting failure. She let the moment stretch, her fingers shaking like a beginner's, and the laughter started again. "Look at her hands," someone shouted. "She's gonna break the thing." Victor clapped, egging them on. But then Maya pressed a single key, a C note, pure and round like a bell ringing in a quiet valley. The sound cut through the noise, sharp and clean. The laughter stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. She began a simple folk melody, her fingers moving with a grace that didn't match her worn-out clothes. Her pedal work was subtle, her breathing steady like she was part of the instrument. The room went still. Even one of the security guards, a burly guy with a buzz cut, turned his head, his hand pausing on his radio. Elena stepped back into the shadows, her tray forgotten, her eyes locked on Maya. The melody wasn't flashy, but it had weight, like a memory you didn't know you'd buried. A woman in the back, her pearls gleaming, dabbed at her eyes, pretending it was just the light. Victor, still standing on his chair, muttered under his breath, "Lucky fluke." But his hands were clenched, his knuckles white. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They were watching, some leaning forward, others frozen like they'd forgotten how to move. Maya didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed on the keys, her face calm, like she was playing for someone who wasn't there. In the midst of the unfolding melody, a tech entrepreneur from the side balcony, his smartwatch beeping faintly, and his posture rigid with self-importance, leaned over the railing and shouted down, "This is amateur hour. I've heard better from my kid's toy keyboard." His assistant, a young man with gelled hair and a nervous tick, forced a laugh to match, slapping the railing for emphasis. "Yeah, boss, she's probably just hitting random notes hoping for pity." The entrepreneur folded his arms, nodding smugly as his words carried across the hushed space, and the assistant pulled out his phone, pretending to record the fiasco with exaggerated shakes of his head, encouraging a few nearby spectators to pull out their devices too, their screens lighting up like fireflies in the dimming atmosphere. Maya, without breaking rhythm, shifted her weight on the bench, slightly, her foot pressing the pedal with a precision that sent a deeper resonance through the hall, causing the entrepreneur's watch to vibrate unexpectedly, his arm jerking back as if stung, while the assistant's phone slipped from his grasp, clattering down the steps, the recording forgotten in the sudden hush that followed her intensified notes. A man in a velvet blazer, an art collector with a pinched face, broke the silence. "She's just mimicking the radio," he scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. The woman in the red dress, the one with the earrings, chimed in. No poor woman could have that kind of finger technique. Her voice was sharp, like she was trying to convince herself. Victor, sensing the room slipping, leaned forward. "Music requires schooling. Money teachers, what do you have?" His words were a challenge meant to cut. Maya didn't look up. She bowed her head slightly, her hands pausing over the keys. "I have a promise," she said, her voice soft but clear, like a stone dropped into still water. The room laughed again, but it was thinner now, less sure. "Promises don't pay bills," someone called out, and the crowd snickered, clinging to their superiority. But then Maya's hands moved again. Her left hand dropped thundering deep chords that seemed to come from the bottom of a well, heavy and resonant. Her right hand answered with a cascade of notes, intricate and fast, a counterpoint that wove through the air like light through a forest. For 10 seconds it was pure fireworks, virtuoso, alive, electric. Then she softened, pulling back to the simple melody she'd started with, like coming home after a storm. The hall went silent. The sound engineer, a guy in a black polo who'd been half asleep at his booth, sat up, his hand hovering over the controls. He turned the room's noise to zero, letting Maya's music fill every corner. An old man at the front, his suit wrinkled from years of wear, whispered to his wife, "Pedal control like that. Only true masters." Elena, still in the shadows, dropped her tray. It clattered to the floor, but no one turned. Her eyes were wet, a single tear cutting down her cheek. As the chords lingered in the air, a fashion designer from the VIP section, her scarf fluttering dramatically, and her rings clinking against her wineglass, stood abruptly, her chair scraping back loudly, and declared, "This is all smoke and mirrors. Anyone can fake a few bars, but real art demands refinement she clearly lacks." Her protege, a slim woman with asymmetric hair and wide eyes, echoed her by snapping her fingers in dismissal. "Master? Please, it's just noise, dressed up as emotion." The designer tossed her scarf over her shoulder with flair, prompting her table to murmur agreements, their heads bobbing like puppets. And the protege reached for a napkin, dabbing imaginary sweat from her brow in exaggerated relief, as if the performance was a burden to endure. Maya, transitioning seamlessly into a softer passage, let her eyelids flutter closed for a brief moment, her body swaying gently with the rhythm, which drew an involuntary gasp from the protege, her napkin crumpling in her fist, while the designer sat back down heavily, her scarf now tangled the murmurs at her table, trailing off into an uncomfortable quiet pierced only by the evolving harmony. Victor wasn't laughing anymore. His face was tight, his jaw set. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp. "Anyone can manipulate emotions." He waved to the security guards, who started moving toward the piano again. A group of his friends, the kind who followed his lead like shadows, piped up. "No one's really crying anyway," one said, her voice dripping with fake pity. The manager, sweating now, stepped forward. "It's time to serve the main course," he said, his tone clipped like he was trying to take back control. Maya didn't look at them. She placed her hands back on the keys, her fingers light deliberate. "This one," she said softly, "is for a friend who never came home." The words landed like a quiet command, and the room held its breath. Then she started playing. Chopin's revolutionary etude exploded from the piano, a storm of speed and defiance, every note sharp and alive. Her hands moved like they were born for this, her body swaying slightly in sync with the music's pulse. The room was gone. She could have been playing in an empty field under a sky full of stars. Without pausing, she flowed into Debussy's Clair de Lune, the notes soft now like moonlight spilling across the tables. An elderly judge, his glasses fogged, took them off his eyes, red and shining. The woman in the red dress, the one who'd mocked her, covered her mouth, a sob breaking through. Elena was crying openly now, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. Others followed, tears slipping down faces that had been smug just minutes ago. Victor's bet, the single tear he'd mocked, turned into a flood, and the Gulla's polished order shattered. Midway through the etude's furious ascent, a hedge fund manager from the far wall, his cufflinks flashing under the lights, and his posture stiff with indignation, slammed his fist on the table, spilling a nearby vase and bellowed, "Stop this charade! She's turning our evening into a sideshow for beggars." His partner, a consultant with pearl earrings and a steely gaze, grabbed a program booklet and fanned herself aggressively, adding, "Absolutely, it's insulting to our standards. Who let her in anyway?" The manager's fist caused ripples in the water glasses around him, and the consultant's fanning sent pages fluttering to the floor, inciting a few sympathetic nods from their circle, who crossed their arms in unison, their faces set in grim determination. Maya, accelerating the tempo without missing a beat, arched her back slightly as the music crested her fingers, blurring across the keys, which prompted the hedge fund manager to flinch his fist, unclenching involuntarily while the consultant's booklet slipped from her hands, landing open on a page about the evening's honored guests. The defiance in the notes overwhelming their protests into a stunned murmur. Victor's face was pale, his hands shaking as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a wad of cash and threw it onto the piano lid, the bills scattering across the glossy surface. "Take your charity and get out," he said, his voice loud but unsteady. "You'll never belong here." A few of his friends nodded, their faces tight, clinging to the last scraps of their status. The manager, his ponytail slick with sweat, hissed, "You've disrupted the program." The room was uneasy, now, eyes darting some ashamed to meet Maya's gaze. She didn't flinch. She stood, her spine straight, her movement slow and deliberate, like a soldier standing at attention. "I don't take alms," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This was a bet, and you lost." A man in the back, an art patron with trembling hands, stepped forward. His face was pale, his eyes wide with recognition. You're Maya Lin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The concerto champion who vanished after the war front." The words hung there, heavy, real. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Maya didn't answer, but her silence was enough. The truth started to surface piece by piece. She'd been a combat medic, playing piano in war zones, her music keeping soldiers' spirits alive when bombs fell. 12 years ago, she'd walked away from the stage, from the spotlight, from everything. No one knew why. No one had seen her since. Until now, following the revelation, a gallery owner from the mezzanine level, her brooch pinned prominently, and her voice carrying an air of authority, rose to her feet, clapping slowly at first in sarcasm. "Oh, bravo for the hidden talent act." Next, she'll claim she's royalty in disguise. Her curator friend with spectacles sliding down his nose and a sketch pad in hand sketched a quick caricature of Maya as a clown at the piano, holding it up for laughs. See, this is what passes for genius these days. The gallery owner's claps echoed oddly in the shifting atmosphere, and the curator's sketch drew a smattering of chuckles from those still resistant, their pencils and phones capturing the moment. But as Maya folded her hands in front of her, her stance unyielding, the gallery owner's claps slowed to a stop, her brooch catching the light awkwardly while the curator crumpled his paper subtly, the whispers around them turning from amusement to questioning glances. She turned to Elena, who was still standing in the shadows, her face streaked with tears. Maya picked up the wad of cash from the piano and pressed it into the girl's hands. "You cried with a true heart," she said, her voice soft but steady. "This pays your tuition. Don't give up music again." Elena's hands shook, clutching the money like it was a lifeline. The room was silent now, the air thick with something new, respect, maybe, or shame. Maya turned to the crowd, her eyes sweeping across the tables, the chandeliers, the faces that had laughed at her. "Tonight's gala is for the Veterans Center," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. "From now on, its leader should be someone who can weep for others." The room shifted. A woman in a blue gown, her face tight with guilt, stood and started clapping. Slowly others joined her. The old man at the front, the one who'd whispered about her pedal control, was on his feet, his hands shaking as he applauded. The sound grew, filling the ballroom, not with mockery now, but with something raw, something real. The patrons one by one turned to Victor, their eyes cold. He'd been the loudest, the cruelest, the one who'd turned her pain into a game. Now they saw him for what he was. A murmur started, then grew louder. They wanted him out. Not just from the gala, but from the Veterans Center board. Maya didn't need to say a word. The room did it for her. Amid the rising applause, a corporate lawyer from the center aisle, his briefcase at his feet and his tie perfectly knotted, cleared his throat loudly, attempting to interject. "This is highly irregular. She can't just waltz in and upend our traditions with a sob story performance." His paralegal aide with a clipboard clutched tightly, and eyes darting nervously nodded emphatically, whispering loudly enough. "Exactly, sir. It's a breach of protocol." The lawyer adjusted his tie with a flourish, expecting support, and the aide flipped through her clipboard pages rapidly, as if searching for a rule to cite, stirring a brief resurgence of murmurs from a few holdouts. Maya, stepping away from the piano bench, extended her hand to help Elena steady herself, her touch gentle yet firm, which caused the lawyer to pause mid-sentence, his tie now askew. While the aide's clipboard slipped, pages scattering like leaves, the applause drowning their objections in a wave of collective affirmation. Victor's face was gray now, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He tried to laugh it off, a weak chuckle that died in his throat. "Fine," he muttered, stepping down from his chair. "You win." But no one was listening. The manager, his voice shaking, tried to call for the main course again, but the crowd ignored him. They were watching Maya, watching Elena, watching the fazioli that had gone from a symbol of their vanity to a mirror of their conscience. The security guards, the ones who'd been ready to drag her out, stood back, their hands at their sides. One of them, the guy with the buzz cut, gave her a small nod like he was apologizing. The days that followed were quiet, but the consequences came fast. Victor's name started trending online, not for his wealth or his deals, but for the video someone had posted, a grainy clip of his mocking laughter, his cruel bet, his pale face when Maya's music silenced him. By the end of the week, his biggest sponsor, a tech firm that loved their charity, photo ops, dropped him. The art collector, the one who'd called her a mimic, was called out in a blog post that went viral. Someone dug up his shady deals. The woman in the red dress, the one with the earrings, stopped showing up at galas. Her friends didn't invite her anymore, their texts going unanswered. The manager kept his job, but he was quieter now, his ponytail less slick, his eyes avoiding the piano every time he passed it. In the wake of the online storm, the banker who had mocked her hygiene found his latest deal collapsing when partners cited reputational risks, his beard no longer neatly trimmed as he paced his office, phone calls unreturned. The socialite with the manicured nails deleted her social media accounts after backlash, flooded in her necklace, gathering dust in a drawer as she avoided mirrors. The venture capitalist's startup pitch failed spectacularly at a conference, investors whispering about his lack of empathy, his glasses fogging as he stammered excuses. The marketing executive's campaign was pulled by clients demanding authenticity, her predatory smile fading into forced politeness at job interviews. The philanthropist's invitations dried up, her fur stole, mothballed, as charities distanced themselves from her name. Maya didn't stay to watch it all fall apart. She left that night, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her coat still tattered. Elena walked her to the door, her hands still clutching the money, her voice thick with gratitude. "Why'd you do it?" she asked, almost a whisper. Maya paused, her hand on the doorframe. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the street where a beat-up old truck rolled by its engine, coughing like it was about to give out. It reminded her of a truck she'd seen years ago, parked outside a field hospital, its driver singing to keep the wounded calm. "I made a promise," she said, finally, her voice soft, "to play for the ones who can't." Elena nodded like she understood, though she couldn't possibly know the weight of it. The Veterans Center got new leadership that week. Maya and Elena were invited to join the board, their names proposed by the same patrons who'd laughed at her. Maya didn't say yes right away. She took her time walking the city streets, her shoes still worn, her coat still frayed. She stopped by a park one morning where a street musician was playing a battered guitar. She dropped a few coins in his case, her fingers brushing the edge of her backpack. The musician looked up, saw her face, and paused mid-strum. "You look like you got a story," he said. Maya just smiled a small quiet thing and kept walking. "Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing."